It's on.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting presentation, and I can probably say that most shipping companies are not at the level that they would want to be. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned that the one thing that we could do is establish a governance process, a formal governance process. But there have been so many high-profile data breaches and leaks. Look at Yahoo, Uber, the Marriott hotels, the Starwood data, and now also the Singapore health system. Sing Health got hacked into and data got released. These are big, large companies and big institutions. Wouldn't they have had a formal governance process in place with a lot of staff looking into it, chief security officers, established procedures, and yet this happened? So, I mean, what's the point? I mean, what can we do?
Like, why bother, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if they had it, it did. Well, okay. So I would agree with you. Presumably, they had, a company that size would have some sort of formal governance process. So, and I think it's really important. You can do everything right and still get hacked, right? I mean, if you look at Maersk, right, commonly referred to as, oh my God, this is kind of the 9/11 of the maritime industry, right? They didn't do anything really wrong, right? And they recovered systematically just as they planned to. They were a victim of a cyber weapon that took advantage of a kind of process that they used for patching, which left them open to something like that. But who would think you're going to be exposed accidentally to a cyber weapon, right? But it happened, right? And the other thing is, it can happen again. So you can do everything right and still get hacked. But the difference is how quickly you recover from it, how confidently you recover from it, how much money it's going to cost you. Theirs was very expensive, but you will note they continued operations and they recovered per plan. It was just a very costly incident. So yeah, it doesn't guarantee you're going to somehow magically be immune. It's not kryptonite, but it will reduce the cost, reduce the frequency, and it'll make cleanup and recovery a lot easier.
So low risk is not necessarily no risk.
Right. You can never move that bar to zero, right? But you want to have it low enough that it reflects your risk appetite, right? I won't say as low as possible because that becomes economically infeasible. You want to have it low enough for your risk appetite, and that varies company to company.
What about the human element? I mean, in some of these data breaches, there have been people who are involved, not people not doing the things they're supposed to do, and people actually exposing this whole system to risk.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that? What do you do to ensure that this doesn't happen?
I'm patenting a product that is basically an electrified keyboard, and if they answer it, it kind of... No, I mean, it's a really good question. It's a legitimate question because it is the weakest link. You can put all of this stuff in place, and one person not following procedure or just that the fish is that good, right, falls for it. So what you have to do, and we were actually having a conversation similar to this about fishing in the lobby, you have to layer your controls, right, so that you can accommodate a failure. So if something gets through the filter, gets through the endpoint, gets to the user activates it, will you have enough in place that after those hurdles, are there more hurdles? In other words, do you have enough of a detection process that you'll detect the unusual activity? Will you detect the anomaly? Can you isolate it? Right? How quickly can you shut it down? So you need to step through those, and you need to, that's what the framework is really good at. By understanding the risk of, hey, we've got all these controls, but it still happens. It still happens. And that's when you do the testing with the malware simulation. Say, okay, let's pretend it just happened, right? Where could that malware go? What could it do? What could it see? Then you start hardening it even more, right? So you want to be able to account and accommodate when that person makes that mistake.
All right. Thank you for a very interesting and a simple approach to cybersecurity. One of the questions that comes to mind is that even though it looks so simple, it is quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And like for third-party ship management companies where you have people who are not willing to put in too much. So do we really have to put in so much time and resource into this? Because, like we said, 70% of the ships don't have this high-fangled IT stuff.
Right.
Where sure
Right.
reach is required, or we have to have open internet. So a simple blocking of USBs and a little bit of pamphlets on phishing, that should close the gap. And why should we bother about it
Right.
at this time and place?
Well, there's two parts to that answer, and the two parts to my answer to that question. Number one, some vessels are not very sophisticated, and simple controls really work well, right? Like if you lock the USBs, as long as the human element doesn't get involved and unlock them when they're not supposed to, right, that control works. But we all know that doesn't happen. Sometimes people do. The other thing is that vessels will get more sophisticated. So simple controls no longer work, right? You're getting mariners, staff that want to know, hey, do you have broadband? Do I got Wi-Fi, right? Maybe they don't want to work for you if you don't have Wi-Fi. This is actually an issue. They might pass on you if you don't have that. So more and more vessels are going to have this, and it's going to get faster, better, cheaper, right? Until eventually it's going to feel pretty much pretty normal to have, like I fly Singapore Airlines coming over, and the Wi-Fi on the plane is really good. I mean, it's just shockingly good. And a year ago, that same Wi-Fi was miserable, like almost unusable, right? So it will advance. Now, why spend the money, right? Well, has anyone had a virus infection take out the COM, take out the ECDIS, or take out something on board which caused that vessel a delay where you had to wait to get that fixed, right? Has anyone had that happen to them that'll admit it? Right? No one. No one's had this happen. Okay, well, I've seen it happen numerous times. And that one delay, okay, for most companies would pay for a year's worth of cybersecurity governance effort, right, on just one incident. So it is worth the effort. It is worth the money to prevent this from costing you a lot of delay and a lot of money. The economics are there.
And thank you for that answer. But getting back to the human element part, like I think you mentioned that this is the one thing, right? And then a governance process, and that's got like 3 components to it. Is it as simple as that, a 3-legged stool? Because when you have the human interaction with these control.
You make 2 points, right? That there may be another side of this, which is if it's the human element, then it's education, right? Education is usually folded into the governance process in terms of if you're managing with the cybersecurity framework, you have to have training, right? And if you're trying to achieve, let's say, ISO 27001, right, certification, you're going to need that training, and it has to be in place. So it actually is there. It's just not specifically mentioned as its own leg, if you will. The other thing you mentioned is, pen testing. Do people get desensitized to it? And, I tend to say no, and even if you do, it's more or less irrelevant. Because let's say if your IT department is sending you test spams regularly, right? Well, you go, oh, this is them again. You're still not going to open it, right? But it's keeping you on your toes, right? And the other side of that is, as a company matures and their security posture hardens over time, we've got companies that have been doing pen tests with us for over 15 years. And I can tell you the pen test now looks very different than the pen test 15 years ago. There's lots of low-hanging fruit back then. Now it's way more, hey, let's test this control this way. Okay, we're going to test that control that way. And it's about documenting that the control is doing its job. It's not so much an free-form attack scenario anymore. It's more of a documented effort to prove the control works or point out the opportunity to improve the control. Does that answer your question?